Says live.
And we're live. This is great. We finally figured it out. Two
Finally figured it
really
out.
smart people. It almost takes three of us to make it work. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing well. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing well. We tried this last week, but I didn't understand how to do the part that puts it on YouTube. So now I think I figured it out. And we're here today to talk about Internet Identity Workshop coming next week
Yeah, one
in
week from today.
Mountain View, California. It's the 18th. Is that I yeah, XVIII.
Yep, number 18.
That's great. Well, for those who have never heard of it, what is Internet Identity Workshop?
So, in 2005, Doc Searles and Kalia Hamlin and I decided we would get a workshop together that would discuss identity that wasn't enterprise. I mean, in 2005, almost all of the identity discussions were around enterprise identity. How do you manage, 2,500 user accounts and those kinds of things? And in fact, there was a conference called Digital ID World at that time that a lot of people would go to, but it didn't discuss the stuff we thought we wanted to discuss, which was identity on the internet, whatever that meant. And so we had the first one, had a number of people who were trying to develop OpenID-like systems, is the way we describe them now. Of course, then OpenID didn't exist yet, but they were, these systems that depended on a URL or something like that as your identifier, and got a whole bunch of those people together and started talking about what identity on the internet might look like, and it's kind of blossomed. Like you said, this is the 18th one, and it's been a lot of fun.
And for those who don't know, what is OpenID and why don't they probably know that they are already using it?
Yeah, well, so OpenID was, like I said, it was based around using your URL as an identifier. It was actually pioneered by OpenID. The actual standard was a combination of things that Drummond Reed and Brad Fitzpatrick and David Ricordan and Dick Hart and Johannes Ernst, all of those guys had developed different systems that were all similar but not quite the same. And when those all came together, they became OpenID. And OpenID was popular. It's been used on a number of websites. Maybe the most popular one was Stack Overflow. Still uses OpenID to log in. And you can, if you go to Stack Overflow and use your OpenID, you can use one from Google or whatever. That was supplanted by something called OAuth, which is what most people are using these days, and almost everybody has probably used it. If you've used Twitter or Google or Facebook to log into something else, then you've used OpenID. I'm sorry, you've used OAuth. And so that those all came out of discussions that happened, not necessarily all of them at IIW, but many of them happened at IIW. It was kind of a neutral place where people could get together and talk about developing those kinds of internet identity standards.
And the great beauty of something like OAuth is you don't have to remember quite as many passwords as you normally used to on the web, where you'd have a different password for every single website you visited.
Yeah, and it's interesting because OAuth is open authorization, not open authentication, and identity geeks make a distinction between those two. Yeah, so when you log into something, that's actually authenticating, saying that you are the right person. When you authorize, that's saying you want to allow something to happen. And OAuth is really built to allow authorization. That is, you want to let somebody use your Facebook account for something, or you want to let somebody use your Dropbox account. So, for example, anyone who has linked Dropbox to an iPhone or Android app has used OAuth in its pure sense, in the sense that you're not logging into something, you're saying, I want this app to have access to my Dropbox account, and it can do things, store files, etc. But the the nice side benefit of that is that if I've authorized you, then you also have authenticated me. So OAuth has also been used by a number of companies just to allow single login or single sign-on using popular credentials like those from Google or Facebook.
Including some of those enterprises that were using all that heavy-duty identity stuff back when Identity Workshop started, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there's still, of course, a lively work going on in enterprise identity, federated identity, those kinds of things. But a lot of the problems that they were trying to solve do get solved by OAuth, especially as mobile has become popular. More and more companies have found that they need to allow access to some internal resource by external people, whether they're their customers or partners or whatever. And OAuth is a great solution to those kinds of things.
One thing that's particularly appealing about Internet Identity Workshop is it's an unconference. Maybe we could explain to viewers what an unconference is.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So a lot of conferences, of course, you go to, and there's an agenda that was set somehow. You may not know how exactly, usually some months in advance so that everybody has a lot of warning about, well, we want you to travel on these days, that sort of thing. In an unconference like Internet Identity Workshop, what happens is we get together at 9 a.m. every morning of the conference. It lasts for 3 days, and have what's called agenda setting. Everybody sits around in a big circle, and anybody who wants to propose a session can write one on a card, stand up and say, I am Phil Windley, and I want to do a session on the Bitcoin blockchain as an identity infrastructure. And then you post it on the wall at a particular room at a particular time, and anybody who's interested in that talk can go. It has a couple of advantages. One advantage is that all of the topics are quite timely in the sense that at least one person there is interested in it, or they wouldn't have proposed it, and it could be something that just came up yesterday, in terms of timeliness. The other advantage is that it's not a couple of people sitting around deciding what the agenda should be. It's kind of a crowd system where everybody is figuring out what the agenda should be.
Okay. Now, in that answer, you mentioned something that most people wouldn't think had anything to do with identity, which is Bitcoin. Let's explain what Bitcoin is and why it matters to identity people.
Well, so there's a couple of different things there. So Internet Identity Workshop has become a place where people interested in internet autonomy or independence have also gathered for various reasons. So there is that. There are quite a few topics that move away from identity and touch something that's somewhat related, whether it be, like I said, indie web kind of things or personal clouds. Doc Searles always has a lot of vendor relationship management or VRM discussions. So reputation has been a big topic. So things that touch on identity are often there. Now, why did I bring up Bitcoin? Well, it happens to be one of the sessions I'm going to propose next week, and it's an interesting one because Bitcoin, while most people have heard about it in the sense that it's a cryptocurrency, I think what's most interesting about it is Bitcoin's blockchain, that is the cryptographic ledger that makes it so that you can't spend the same coin twice, is a viable distributed consensus system. What I mean by that is it allows a group of people, some of whom may have bad motives, to reach consensus about a particular mapping, right? A ledger maps one thing into another. In the case of Bitcoin, it's mapping who owns what coins, who spent what coin where, the kind of transaction system. But if you think about DNS, for example, DNS is an identity system that maps a domain name into an IP address. Using a distributed consensus system like the Bitcoin blockchain, you can create mappings between domain names and IP addresses that don't rely on any kind of centralized authority like DNS does. So some interesting identity implications to things like Bitcoin.
Indeed, the deeper you dig into Internet Identity Workshop, the more it gets into issues of personal freedom, liberty, anonymity, a lot of hot topics that you'll find on the front page of a lot of newspapers.
That's right. There are a lot of people who come to Internet Identity Workshop to discuss the ins and outs of various identity protocols, or to propose a new one, or whatever. I mean, like we've talked about, OpenID and OAuth are both protocols that have had their roots at Internet Identity Workshop, but lots of people go there to talk about the things that touch on identity, but also impact all of us, like as you mentioned, anonymity, pseudonymity, how we use our identities online, and the systems that interact with us using those.
And another interesting thing is that this is sort of an incubator for some startup companies, and I gather that next week's conference has a little bit of something for them too.
Yeah, we're going to do something new this time that we haven't done before. We've invited a number of VCs, venture capitalists, to come and participate on the last day. We're going to break that up into two pieces. The first piece, we're going to actually have them on a panel and talk about, in this area of internet identity, personal clouds, indie web, that sort of thing, what are the business models that might be fundable? What makes sense from a business standpoint? But then we're also going to allow some of the companies that come to pitch to these VCs and kind of have a little pitch session. Kind of a speed dating or speed pitching session. So should be a lot of fun.
And it all takes place at the Computer History Museum, which is in Mountain View, California, pretty much a stone's throw from Google headquarters.
That's right. Yeah, it's right off Shoreline Boulevard on 101, and May 6th through 8th, so Tuesday through Thursday of next week.
And I know you also have a number of volunteers who make this possible. This is not a big behemoth of a conference, but it's certainly something I always get a great deal of value and ideas from every time I go.
Yeah, it's a good sized workshop, I think. There's usually 200 or so people. We've had as many as 300 in the past, and as you mentioned, it's an unconference, so it has a little bit of a different feel to it that way. It's fairly inexpensive as conferences go. We basically are just trying to cover our costs. Rent the space, buy the food. There's a lot of food. We buy essentially every meal for all 3 days. So, a lot of the ticket is going to buy the food.
And the organizers are yourself and Doc Searles and Kalia Hamlin, correct?
That's right. That's right. Identity woman. She is more.
The identity woman. Yes. So if people want to find out more, they can go to your website, which is, what is that website?
InternetIdentityWorkshop.com. So all one word, InternetIdentityWorkshop.com, or just IIW18 at Eventbrite also works. IIW18.eventbrite.com.
Will there be a Twitter hashtag for the conference?
There is. Just IIW is what we normally use.
Good, good. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad we had a chance to finally chat on air on Google Hangout about next week's event, and thanks for making the time to speak to me today.
Thanks, Scott. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
All right.